with every time you suffer and you do that, you go one level higher, one level higher, one level higher, one level higher. And even after a year already, if you just progressively do that all the time, you're gonna be a lot better than you were before. Hello and welcome. So welcome to a new episode. It has been a while, and it has been so for a very good reason. The very precise reason is simply that I was very busy with a personal challenge. And a personal challenge, every time I get one, I take them really seriously because they are super opportunities to grow. And with personal challenges, I mean pain and suffering. That is essentially what a challenge for me is. It's a nice word for you're gonna suffer. So the reason why I like personal challenges or suffering so much is because it is always an opportunity to grow, right? So every time I suffer, I get in a way excited because there's something to learn. And no matter how this thing turns out, if it's gonna work out or if it's not gonna work out, it doesn't matter. I always come out stronger, and I always need to come out to improve myself. And I always do anyway. Okay, so I never go out of pain and suffering without being better afterwards. You see, if you suffer, you screwed up. There's no talking around it. If you suffer, you screwed up usually. There are, of course, other circumstances, but most of the time, you screwed up. And this fire which you have in that moment, it needs to burn away your flaws. Okay? So it's not bad that you suffer. It's totally fine that you suffer. But you need to get your things out of that. You need to learn from it. You need to let the suffering take away your weakness. Okay? I will get into that later a bit. Because in that moment, it's like, I told you that before in one of the videos, that it's like a higher power almost sometimes, which wants to teach you something. And that's why you suffer, right? Because you screwed up somewhere. And if you learn your lesson, your suffering will ease. And that is essentially really how it works. That is the whole story behind that, why I always like suffering so much. Now let's say something happens and you first get into this depressed or negative state. Don't think that it's something bad. The first thing you need to do is you need to sit down and you need to look at it. You need to really look at it, and no shying away. Don't go for alcohol or superficial fun, but you need to sit down and really look the problem into the eyes, okay? You really need to stare at it like there's no tomorrow. And it's pretty good because you see, when you're weak, because you're depressed or negative or let down or whatever, you are more open. Your defenses are lowered. So things come easier out of yourself usually, right? So you can collect these pieces easier than if your barriers are up, because your barriers kind of, they prevent you from feeling a bit the finer, granular things in these situations. So that is a good thing that you're down, because that is an opportunity to finally lay out the board, as I call it. And there's a thing from the Avatar series, there's a super quote which nails it so good that when you hit your lowest point, then you're open for the biggest change. Okay, and that is really true. It's kind of like a natural reflex that when you're screwed up, you need to adjust and learn, and somehow nature built that into ourselves. And in that moment, when we are really down, when we hit the bottom low, we come out much stronger thanks to that treat. I don't know how to call it, or trait. Yeah. So what you do first is you sit down and you write down everything you can and everything which comes up. Questions, experiences, no matter what, no matter how unimportant it also sometimes seems, but you need to pull out everything you have out of that situation. Because otherwise you will never get the entire board. Sometimes the reason why you're depressed is also sometimes because you don't have the full transparency of the problem. I can assure you, in 95% of the times, if you don't try to squeeze out every piece of the problem, you will not have the full picture. I can assure you that. I really rarely had people who really figured it out by just looking at it and not trying to lay out the board. Okay, So you sit down, you write everything down, questions, whatever. So what you write down is also all the possible flaws, all the weaknesses, all the mistakes which might have led to the situation. Situations where you could have done better, maybe. Doesn't mean that it might be that things would be different if you would have, but you need to be aware that by this, you can see what has been going on, okay? So no action, but you can identify action still, okay? So you can sit down, you can see that, you can see what you could have done, but you don't do anything yet. Because when you're in this low state, low energy state or whatever, it doesn't work. You won't have that much energy. I go into that in a second. You can flip that. Then after the low energy stage comes the energy stage. But it depends a bit on what problem you have in your life. But I would say this stage should not be more than a few days. If you do that longer than a few days, you need to kick your butt really badly to get out of there. And it's quite easy to do that because the first thing you need to do to get your emotions up, you need to really rile up your emotions. And you can do that through some different tricks that you provoke a bit anger in yourself or whatever. But you need to really get the emotions up because emotions are energy, right? And then you can take this energy and convert it into action, okay? So what you can do is one of the tricks I have is you can turn depression into anger. And you can do that by, for example, flipping it around a bit. If you have a person who gave you trouble, I don't know, your boss or whatever, you can say, he could have really been nicer, like, whatever. You can flip it a bit around. Even if it's not true, it doesn't matter, okay? So it is just important that in these situations, you turn the energy into action. Then you need to have that and you need to boil it up, okay? It's a trick, okay? And then what you can also do maybe to do that is you can talk to yourself, you can scream or things like these. I don't like that too much, the screaming or anything like that, but talking to yourself is usually pretty good too. You can talk to a friend, of course, who can kick your butt. If you have a good friend, he does that. If you have a good friend and you're depressed, he will come around and he will kick your butt and make sure that you don't feel totally depressed, but that you keep on moving, keep on acting, that you keep on improving. It's super important that you have friends like that. That is so unbelievably valuable if you have that. Now, when you have the energy, you go at the problem, whatever you have, like there's no tomorrow. Like really no tomorrow. You need to punch it hard, absolutely to the limit, okay? And you need to do your homework. So let's say in the previous stage, you identified 3 or 4 actions to be done, which would be already a lot, to be honest, to work on yourself. Then you need now to kick it so hard to work on these things. And I say 3 to 4 maybe, because usually the issues are rather large than small, okay? And you cannot do many of them. I would say 4 is already a lot. Like if it's 2, I would say that's pretty okay. Okay, so that might be something that you work on, how you look, how you represent yourself, how you interact with another human, okay? How to learn new skills maybe. But I can tell you that it's taking a lot of effort usually to implement that. So identifying what might be wrong goes sometimes rather quickly, sometimes not. It depends a bit on what personality type you are, if you hide things inside of yourself from your past maybe or whatever. But on the other side also, if you don't do that, implementing something like inducing change inside of yourself, that is fairly hard. Because I told you before, and I always will tell you that repeatedly, so you really learn it, you're a pattern. And you like to be that pattern. And changing that pattern in a way is always taking energy and effort. And you don't want to do that kind of naturally because it's effort. So changing that pattern is sometimes extremely hard, especially when it's things very deep down. And you need to keep on constantly working on that and shoving energy into that, like learning a new language, for example, that you get this thing done, right? And that is fine. But really understand that the hardest part is usually the action afterwards and the consistency. Consistency is king, that you stay on it. And like I said, that the action is being carried out and then gradually you improve. Now, the thing is, if you improve, things might suddenly turn out well. Let's say, for example, you had an argument with a person and you had struggled with that person because maybe you were not reacting appropriately to a situation, right? Because you were, I don't know, had some traumata from the past or whatever. So the right thing to do would be obviously to work on that and get back to that person and talk with them. But don't expect anything. But you could go back to them, or, automatically you connect at work or whatever. I don't know how the situation is. But sometimes then things all of a sudden flip. You don't need to do anything, but that person recognizes, oh wow, he really changed, right? And things now are much better off. And all of a sudden, everything aligns more, that you have a better connection with that person, for example, or you get more what you want. Yeah, so that is that part. It doesn't always gonna turn out like this. Let's say you have a job offer, you didn't get it for good reasons maybe. So now you have to, of course, work your butt off to get the skills, whatever you wanted to have in order to get the next job. So the thing is, in that situation, the job offer's gone, right? You cannot do anything about it. Or I don't know, also different situations. So sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but it's not important. What's really important is that if something screwed up, that you went one level higher. And even if it's just one level higher, with every time you suffer and you do that, you go one level higher, one level higher, one level higher, one level higher. And even after a year already, if you just progressively do that all the time, you're gonna be a lot better than you were before, right? So you need to progress all the time, every single day. And as I told you, the biggest chances and changes are usually when you suffer. And those are the biggest gifts given to you in life. And if you never suffer or do anything like that, experience anything like that, you do something wrong. I can totally assure you, if you're totally comfortable all the time, you screwed up. Because then you're not growing. If that is the life you want, that is totally fine. But you will never get anywhere. And for example, I talked to one guy these days. A few women about a guy. And it was quite interesting because they were kind of curious why some men are very creepy to them and that way. Or don't, interact with them appropriately. And it's quite obvious that these men just don't have the skills. They have nothing to offer to these women. So they try to sway a woman to get her, which is quite interesting what they told me. Like really creepy situation with guys. And a guy who has decent skills, human skills, who has worked on himself very hard, would never be creepy or strange or try to drag a woman with strange ways into a bed. Like, who does that, right? So super strange. So it's really important that you level yourself up over time, because otherwise everyone around you will not have a great time. And I always like to say this, that the better you are off and the better you are, everyone around you profits. Everyone. If you, for example, have better character traits because you work out the edges you have, and we all have a ton of them. It's a never-ending story. I learned that a long time ago, and I'm still working out my edges. I'm far from perfect. But every time I get better, everyone around me profits. And that is such a relieving and great thing to me, that I can provide this for the people I love around myself. But also in a way that, let's say just like a job, like your job gets better and better and better, you can also financially take better care of the people around you. And I don't know, it's not necessary, but when they have a need, a special need financially, or they need assistance in that way, you can just help them out. And that's also a really nice thing, because that kind of lets you also show them that you love them, like in a way of good deeds. But at the same time, it's kind of like reassuring that, okay, it's really like that. If you improve, everyone else improves too. And you can make kind of like your surrounding better. And I want always to emphasize that, because a big problem many people do and think about that is, if I get better, just I hoard more money and I'm better off and everyone else needs to suffer because they don't do it. You are limited by your environment. Always. So if someone suffers somewhere nearby or around you, everyone suffers, including you. So you cannot rise and create a really much better place or world or whatever if there's a part of society which suffers enormously, which is even a larger part probably, and because you succeed. That would be really terrible. So you need to make sure that other people have more than just a little bit, really something from you and your success that you've grown. And that is really also a big motivation for me why I do this all the time, because I can just help people also around myself. Doesn't mean necessarily that you do the work for them, that you just give them presents and gifts. That would be extremely dangerous. But you need to let them know that you genuinely care about them and that they are not at risk of getting lost or anything like that. And I think that is already making a super huge difference with most people. Now, last but not least, let's talk a bit about the edges of the whole thing. So one thing you always need to do is physical exercise. There is no way around physical exercise. And I like to emphasize that because many people, they fall into this depression and then they don't do anything. You cannot afford that. Why do you fall into depression? What is depression? Depression is too much thinking. Depression is not taking action. That is maybe the best description of it. You could take action, but you don't. You don't take the appropriate action, so you are depressed. You stay in that depressive mood or whatever. So you need to take action. So in any case, the physical exercise has one great benefit. If you push yourself, then the thinking reduces. And it's quite natural if you observe yourself when you do, I don't know, maybe some sprints or something really exhausting, that the energy in your head is reduced because the body needs it physically. That's the whole trick behind it, why you get your head out of when you do sports, right? So the good thing is, if you do that, you're going to be much better off in that situation. But also when you go into the energy stage, because usually there you have a lot of energy and you need the energy. And there's a very counterintuitive, concept in nature. People always think, I don't have energy today. I don't do anything. But this is not how it works. It's so funny that nature does it like that. That you think that not spending energy gives you energy. What gives you energy is using energy. So it's kind of like if you don't train, you don't have a lot of power or endurance or whatever. And you can get into this flow mode in life where if you start running and doing things and going left and right and trying to stay active throughout the whole day, I always do sports exercises next to my job. It keeps me in the flow, in the loop, it keeps me going. Because the more energy I can excite and the more I use it, the more I get out of it. It's a bit a counterintuitive thing, but that is just how it works. So you have more power to actually do the action. So sports in any way, or activity, I would call it even, physical exercise, is absolutely mandatory all the time. In your life, you cannot afford to do that. And one thing I also don't recommend if you are in a state of deep pain and suffering and all of these things, definitely favor physical exercise over anything like meditation. Because the problem is, when you don't do anything, your head will start doing things. Most of the time, it will tell you a lot of stories which will make you more depressed and so forth, and more thinking. So even if you're in the action stage, usually you're still partially in the thinking stage. That's just how we work. We can't let go necessarily of everything right away. So you need keep on training to keep that low. And like I said, rather go running than doing a morning meditation. I, for example, do that at the moment. I do a little bit some Qigong in between, but most of the time I do something freaking heavy, difficult. Go in the sea right in the morning when it's cold. I don't know, something which just is moving. Because it's not called moving on for no reason in English, right? It's literally called moving on, and that is what you need to be doing. You need to do action. You need to take action for your life and for the changes. And it will not improve your life if you don't do anything and you don't move on. So you cannot stay passive too long. You cannot do different things. You really need to start moving. My dog is looking at me at the moment because he wants the toy thrown. She's too cute sometimes. Okay. So if you do that every time you suffer, a few years and you are gonna be incredibly better off. Like in 3 years, you're gonna be a totally different person. And 3 years is nothing. Like, think about it. Like, even after 1 year, you're already gonna be much different. But after 3-4 years, I always say 3-4 years is basically a life. If you live like me, with that intensity all the time, after 3-4 years, you're a different person. You lived a whole life. And then everything, you're a totally different personality, totally different path than before. If people ask me, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? I would always get it wrong. You cannot imagine how distant I'm off than what I would have told you 5 years ago. And that is good. That is very good. Because it happened that I followed the action. I turned out not where I wanted to be 5 years ago, but it is incredibly great. Because where I'm now, that is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And the way how I am is exactly how I'm supposed to be. And even if I'm suffering from the consequences of my actions, and I still need to work and improve myself, I know that things are gonna get better. Okay? So I give it always my all. And by that love, pain, and suffering, you need it. You need it to progress. And there's a nice saying that also, if you want to walk the path of enlightenment, you must be willing to sin. Because you see, if you would be enlightened, and you would know the path to enlightenment, which is more or less the same as being enlightened, you wouldn't need to do anything, right? So you don't know the path really, let's be honest. We don't really know, right? So you need to figure out how you can get there. You're placed in this life as an infant, you have no clue, and then you need to figure things out. And you do sometimes actions, and then you regret them, or you suffer for them. And then you need to learn. You need to adjust. And you see there are these people who are always afraid of making mistakes, and it's very strong, for example, in my home country, in the German culture. People just, they love their rules so much, they're super afraid of making mistakes or, breaking rules or whatever. It's super funny. So, but you will never progress if you have that mindset that you don't want to suffer at all. It just doesn't work that way, right? So in order to become better, you need to be willing to make mistakes sometimes. And I say willing is not that you make people's life consciously more terrible. We call that a drama person. Don't become a drama person. That is utterly stupid. But what I'm talking about is that you try things out, sometimes push the limits a bit, and sometimes even over the limit a bit, that you know exactly where the limit is. Because you see, if you, for example, I have people who go doing sports with me, and then they're like, and I can't do it anymore. And then I'm like, but you're still standing. For example, one friend of mine, we were doing squats, and we stopped with squats when he was stronger than me, when I couldn't do them anymore. And with I couldn't do them anymore was my brain was sending signals to the legs and they wouldn't move anymore. Do you understand? So that is how far you sometimes need to go. You need to go across the threshold and then try to continue, and it just doesn't work. It's really the threshold, and then you know where it is. Then you know exactly where it is. And then you can move on. And is that a mistake? Yes. Probably, because you're going to suffer the days afterwards, I can tell you. A few days. But first of all, it's also pleasurable. It's a bit spicy, I would call it. I like it spicy in life. But on the other hand, also, it teaches you the lesson that you know exactly what needs to be done, what's too much, what's not, and how far you can go if you need to. And that is a good thing. That is really a good thing. But also when it comes to interacting with other humans, let's say, I don't know, you date someone and it doesn't work out, and then you need to figure out also how to improve yourself based on that. And if you have a very friendly person who you dated or whatever, you can ask them, hey, why didn't you go forward also, and then you take the feedback, and based on that, you can then move on and figure things out better. And that is so valuable. If you ever get rejected in life from other people or whatever, ask them. That is super valuable. If you have no clue, especially, that is super valuable. Like, I can still tell you that the first girlfriends I got rejected, I was thinking for a very long time, probably, almost a decade over it when I think back. And after a decade, I started understanding it because I had grown so much that I look back and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have taken myself either if I was that woman. I just had nothing to offer. I just was not a man who had anything to offer to a woman. And I found it quite interesting, that sometimes it takes really long if you want to figure it out yourself. And if you have someone, which is often also not necessarily, by the way, great, that the people will tell you at least that what was wrong with you, and you have a list and you can work on that. But also don't be naive. Some people have no clue what they're talking about, and they have their own problems and they project them onto you, and you try to please just someone, which will never work because it was never your problem in the beginning. So be a bit, playful. Don't always trust everything, but like I said, lay out the map, and part of laying out the map would be also feedback from another person, and you're gonna be off really great. So I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you like the episode, subscribe, and we're gonna see each other now much sooner again. If not, another challenge comes in, because as you know, I love pain and suffering, even though I hate it when it's